The explosion ripped through the subway tunnel 3 floors below Vatican City, and Cassian Volpe was already running before the dust settled. His black tactical gear cut through the emergency lighting as he vaulted over the marble barrier, separating the tourist areas from the restricted zones. The gold counter in his left hand beeped rapidly. 47 souls and climbing. Volpe, report. Cardinal Toretti's voice crackled through his earpiece. Breach in Tunnel 7. Mass casualty event. I count 53 souls so far, but they're still coming. Cassian slid down the emergency ladder, his boots hitting concrete with a metallic clang. The tunnel stretched ahead, filled with smoke and the groans of twisted metal. The Vatican's Last Judgment unit had exactly 18 minutes to count every soul before the window closed. After that, the dead would be lost to bureaucratic limbo, neither heaven nor hell claiming them. Cassian had never missed a deadline in 7 years. He sprinted toward the wreckage, the counter's golden display climbing. 61, 62, 63. Each number represented a life that needed accounting. The rules were simple enough. Rule 1. Count every soul exactly once. Rule 2. Never count your own soul. Rule 4. Report discrepancies immediately to Cardinal Oversight. Rule 5. Maintain absolute silence during count operations. Rule 3 had never been written down. Cassian reached the first cluster of bodies. A businessman in a torn suit, his briefcase spilled open revealing family photos. The counter registered his soul with a soft chime. A woman in a blue dress, her phone still clutched in her hand. The screen cracked, but displaying a text that read, "Running late, be there soon." Another chime. The work required speed, not sentiment. Cassian moved through the debris field with practiced efficiency. Each soul needed proper documentation before the 18-minute window expired. He'd seen what happened to uncounted souls once. They became something else entirely, something the church preferred not to discuss in official documents. 79 souls confirmed, he reported, stepping over a section of collapsed ceiling. Moving to Sector 2. Volpe, we're reading some kind of interference on your counter. Are you getting accurate readings? Cassian glanced at the device. The golden numbers flickered between 79 and 80. Slight fluctuation. Still operational. He rounded a corner and stopped. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, sat against the tunnel wall. Her school uniform was dirty but intact, and she was quietly humming a tune he didn't recognize. The counter showed no reading for her. This had never happened before. Cassian approached slowly. "Hello there. What's your name?" The girl looked up with brown eyes that seemed too calm for someone who'd just survived an explosion. "Lucia Marchetti. Are you here to help?" "Yes, I am." "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "I was on the train with Mama, but when the loud noise happened, I woke up here." She gestured to the destruction around them. "Mama's not here anymore." The counter still showed no reading. Cassian had encountered injured survivors before, but the device always registered living souls. He pressed the diagnostic button. All systems showed green. "Lucia, I need you to come with me. We'll find your mama." "She's not lost," Lucia said, standing up and brushing dust from her skirt. "She already went to the bright place. She told me to wait for the man with the golden box." Cassian's throat tightened. The counter beeped once, showing 80 souls total. Lucia's count hadn't registered. "How do you know about the golden box?" Mama explained about the rules before she left. She said Rule 1 means you count everyone once. Rule 2 means you don't count yourself. Rule 4 means you tell the important people if something's strange. Rule 5 means you can't talk while you're working. Cassian's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Standard protocols dictated immediate extraction for any civilian with knowledge of unit operations. But this was a child, and she was clearly traumatized. "What about Rule 3, Lucia?" The girl tilted her head. Mama said Rule 3 was the most important one, but nobody writes it down because writing makes things real, and some things should stay hidden. The counter's display began cycling through numbers rapidly. 80, 79, 81, 78. Cassian had 12 minutes remaining before the window closed. What does Rule 3 say? Count the living separately from the dead, but never count the ones who choose to stay between. The tunnel's emergency lighting flickered. In the brief moment of darkness, Cassian thought he saw other figures standing in the distance, watching them. When the light steadied, the tunnel appeared empty except for him and Lucia. "There are others here," Lucia said matter-of-factly. "They're waiting to see what you do." Cassian's training kicked in. Unknown entities, compromised operation, civilian with classified knowledge. He should abort, call for backup, and evacuate immediately. But 80 souls hung in the balance, and he'd never failed a count. "Show me where they are." Lucia took his hand. Her fingers felt warm, which should have been reassuring, but somehow wasn't. She led him deeper into the tunnel, past the worst of the wreckage. The counter continued its erratic behavior, numbers shifting without pattern. "There," she pointed to what appeared to be an empty section of tunnel. "Can't you see them?" Cassian stared at the space. His eyes registered nothing but something else, some deeper sense. Detected presence. Movement without motion. Attention without observation. How many are there? Lots, maybe 20 or 30. They died in the explosion too, but they don't want to be counted. They want to stay and watch what happens next. The golden counter now displayed question marks instead of numbers. Cassian had 8 minutes remaining, and his equipment was failing. Standard protocol demanded he report the malfunction and request immediate backup. But if these entities were avoiding the count, they risked becoming something worse than lost souls. "Why don't they want to be counted?" Lucia shrugged. "Would you want to leave if you could see what comes after?" "What comes after, Lucia?" "The choosing, heaven or hell or something else. But if you're not counted, you get to stay here and watch everyone else make their choice. Some people think that's better." Cassian understood now why Rule 3 was never written down. The knowledge itself was dangerous. If people knew they could avoid judgment by refusing to be counted, the entire system would collapse. The balance between redemption and damnation depended on universal participation. He raised the counter toward the empty space where Lucia indicated the entities waited. The device showed no readings, just continued question marks. "I need to count them," he said to the apparently empty air. "It's not optional." The tunnel's temperature dropped noticeably. Lucia squeezed his hand tighter. "They don't like that," she said. "They're saying you can't make them be counted if they don't consent." "Tell them consent isn't part of the equation. Every soul gets judged. That's how it works." Lucia whispered something in a language Cassian didn't recognize. The response came as a feeling rather than words, amusement mixed with defiance. They say the rules don't apply to them because they never agreed to follow the rules. Cassian checked his watch. 6 minutes remaining. If he didn't complete the count, 80 souls would be lost. If he ignored the entities avoiding judgment, an unknown number would remain in limbo indefinitely, potentially growing in power and influence. He made a decision that would either save the day or end his career. "Lucia, I need you to help me. Can you see them clearly?" "Yes." "Count them out loud. Tell me exactly how many there are." The girl closed her eyes in concentration. 26, but they're getting angry now. The tunnel began to vibrate, not with seismic activity, but with something else. The emergency lights flickered more rapidly, and the temperature continued dropping. Cassian pulled out his backup counter, a silver device reserved for emergency situations. Unlike the standard gold unit, this one could track reluctant souls, but using it came with severe personal costs. The Vatican had 12 of these devices, and operators who used them rarely returned to active duty unchanged. "Last chance," he called to the empty space. "Submit to the count voluntarily, or I'll use enhanced methods." The vibration intensified. Lucia opened her eyes, which now reflected the emergency lighting like mirrors. They say you don't understand what you're threatening. They say Rule 3 exists because some things are worse than staying between life and death. What's worse? Being forced to choose when you're not ready for the consequences. Cassian activated the silver counter. Immediately, the tunnel filled with figures. 26 people of various ages, all wearing expressions of profound sadness, mixed with determination. They stood in a loose circle around him and Lucia, close enough to touch, but maintaining careful distance. The silver device began registering their presence, but slowly, as if encountering resistance. Each reading came with a cost. Cassian felt his own energy draining, his life force being used to power the enhanced counting process. "Stop," said a middle-aged man who'd been standing closest to them. "You're killing yourself to count us." "It's my job." "Your job will destroy you if you continue. We know what happens to soul counters who use the silver device. We've watched 3 others die from it over the years." Cassian's vision began to blur, but the counter showed progress. 1 soul registered, then 2, then 3. 23 to go, and his body was already failing. "There has to be another way," Lucia said. She released his hand and stepped toward the group of entities. "What if you all chose together? What if nobody had to choose alone?" The figures looked at each other, communicating through methods Cassian couldn't perceive. After several long moments, the middle-aged man nodded. "We'll consent to the count, but only if the child comes with us. She doesn't belong in your world anymore anyway." Cassian's training screamed against this arrangement, but his failing body left few options. 2 minutes remained before the window closed. If he couldn't complete the count, all 80 souls would be lost, including these 26. What happens to her if she goes with you? The same thing that happens to everyone eventually. She makes her choice, but with people who understand how difficult choosing can be. Lucia turned to Cassian. "It's okay. I was supposed to die in the explosion anyway. This way, I get to help everyone else too." The logic was sound, even if it violated every protection protocol for civilians. Cassian made another career-ending decision. "Count off," he ordered, switching back to the gold device. "Everyone together." The 26 figures and Lucia formed a line. One by one, they called out numbers. 1, 2, 3. Each voice was clear and distinct, and the golden counter registered each soul properly. 4, 5, 6. As they counted, their forms became more solid, more present. The tunnel's temperature returned to normal, and the emergency lighting steadied. 25, 26, 27. The count completed with 30 seconds to spare. 107 souls total, all properly registered and ready for judgment. The golden counter chimed once and displayed Operation Complete. Lucia walked over to Cassian one final time. "Thank you for not forcing us. Mama was right about you being the good one. How did your mother know about me?" "She didn't tell me everything, just that someone with a kind heart would come to count us, and that Rule 3 would be the hardest rule for him to follow." The group of souls began to fade, not disappearing, but transitioning to whatever came next. Lucia waved goodbye as she joined them. "Remember," she called as her voice grew distant, "Rule 3 keeps some things hidden for good reasons." Cassian stood alone in the tunnel, surrounded by debris and silence. His earpiece crackled back to life. "Volpe report. We lost your signal for the last 4 minutes. Operation complete. 107 souls counted and processed, no complications. Copy that. Emergency services are en route to secure the scene. Return to base for debriefing." Cassian holstered both counters and headed for the ladder. As he climbed toward the surface, he thought about Lucia's mother and how she'd known about Rule 3. More importantly, he wondered how many other people knew the unwritten rule existed. The Vatican's Last Judgment Unit had been operating for over 600 years, and in all that time, Rule 3 had never been documented. But if civilians were beginning to understand how the system worked, how long before others tried to exploit it? He reached ground level as the first ambulances arrived. The tourist areas had been evacuated, leaving only security personnel and emergency responders. Cardinal Toretti waited by the elevator, his red robes stark against the ancient marble. Successful operation? Yes, Your Eminence. All souls accounted for. The cardinal studied his face. You look troubled, Cassian. Was there something unusual about this count? Cassian considered his words carefully. Nothing that couldn't be handled within existing protocols. Good, because we have another situation developing. There was an incident at the children's hospital across the city. Preliminary reports suggest 40 to 50 souls, but early responders are reporting some kind of interference with standard counting equipment. When do I deploy? Immediately. But Cassian. The cardinal placed a hand on his shoulder. I want you to remember that our rules exist for important reasons. Sometimes the most merciful action is the one that seems most difficult. As they rode the elevator up to the equipment room, Cassian wondered if Cardinal Toretti knew about Rule 3. The old man's words suggested deeper knowledge than he typically shared with field operatives. The elevator reached the proper floor, and Cassian began preparing for his next mission. But as he checked his equipment, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The silver counter was missing from its secure case. Your Eminence, he called. But when he turned around, Cardinal Toretti was gone. A note lay on the equipment table where the cardinal had been standing. Rule 3 is more important than you realize. The children's hospital situation requires special handling. Trust your instincts, and remember that some choices can't be unmade. A friend. Cassian grabbed his standard gear and headed for the door. Whatever was happening at the hospital, it was connected to the tunnel incident and to Rule 3. And someone was deliberately orchestrating events to test his understanding of the unwritten rule. The elevator descended toward the garage level, and Cassian prepared for what might be his most dangerous assignment yet. Cassian's motorcycle roared through Rome's narrow streets, weaving between emergency vehicles racing toward the children's hospital. His earpiece buzzed with updates from dispatch, but something felt orchestrated about the timing. 2 major incidents in one day, both involving complications with soul-counting equipment, was statistically beyond coincidence. The hospital's emergency entrance was chaos. Ambulances lined the circular drive, paramedics rushing patients on gurneys through automatic doors. But as Cassian approached the building, he noticed something that made him brake hard and dismount quickly. Every ambulance was empty. The gurneys were empty. The paramedics were going through the motions of emergency response, but there were no patients. He activated his standard counter. The reading showed 0 souls in the immediate area, which was clearly wrong. Even ignoring patients, the medical staff alone should have registered dozens of readings. This is Volpe arriving at the hospital, requesting immediate backup and clarification on the nature of this incident. Static answered him. His communication link was being jammed. Cassian drew his sidearm and entered through a side entrance used by maintenance staff. The hospital's interior was similarly bizarre. Nurses moved through corridors, checking charts and monitoring equipment, but all the rooms were empty. The pediatric ward, which should have been filled with young patients, contained nothing but made beds and silent medical equipment. His counter remained at 0. A familiar voice called from behind him. They're all here, but they're not here. Cassian spun around to find Lucia standing in the hallway, still wearing her school uniform from the tunnel incident. But that was impossible. She had been counted and processed, transitioning to whatever came after. Lucia, how are you here? I'm not, really. I'm talking to you from the in-between place. The same place where the children from this hospital are hiding. What happened to them? Someone came here with the silver counter, someone who knew about Rule 3 but didn't understand it properly. They tried to force count souls that weren't ready to choose, and it broke something. Cassian's worst fears were being confirmed. The silver counter was designed for emergency use only because it could damage the fundamental systems that govern soul processing. If someone had used it incorrectly, they could have created a cascade failure. Who took the silver counter? The same person who's been watching your work for months. The same person who arranged for you to learn about Rule 3 in the tunnel today. Lucia led him deeper into the hospital, past the fake emergency response activity. As they walked, she explained what had really happened. 3 hours ago, someone came here claiming to be from your unit. They said there had been a mass casualty event involving the children's ward, and they needed to count souls immediately. But there was no mass casualty event. It was a test. A test of what? Whether you would follow Rule 3 properly when the stakes were highest. They reached the hospital's chapel, a small room filled with wooden pews and religious artwork. At the altar stood Cardinal Toretti, but his appearance was different. His red robes seemed to shimmer, and his eyes held depths that hadn't been there during their earlier conversation. "Hello, Cassian. Thank you for coming so quickly." Cassian kept his weapon raised. "Who are you, really?" "I am exactly who I appear to be. Cardinal Francesco Toretti, Oversight Director for the Last Judgment Unit. But I'm also something else. I'm the original architect of Rule 3, and I've been waiting 700 years for someone to understand it properly." The chapel's atmosphere shifted. The walls became transparent, revealing the true nature of the hospital. Children filled every room, but they existed in a state between life and death. They were conscious and aware, but unable to move forward or backward in the cosmic process. "What did you do to them?" "I didn't do anything. Another member of our organization did. Someone who discovered the existence of Rule 3 and decided to test its limits without understanding the consequences." Cardinal Toretti gestured to the altar, where the silver counter lay open and sparking with damaged circuitry. Cardinal Benedetti took the device and came here with a theory. He believed that if he could force unwilling souls to submit to counting, he could eliminate the possibility of entities avoiding judgment entirely. He thought he was closing a loophole in the system. But instead, he created exactly the situation Rule 3 was designed to prevent. When you force souls to be counted before they're ready for the consequences, you trap them in a state where they can neither live nor die properly. Cassian lowered his weapon. The situation was worse than equipment failure. It was a fundamental breakdown in the cosmic order. How do we fix it? That depends entirely on how well you understood your lesson in the tunnel today. Lucia stepped forward. "Tell him about my mother." Cardinal Toretti nodded. Lucia's mother was Elena Marchetti, my predecessor as director of the Last Judgment Unit. She died in the tunnel explosion, but she arranged to be there specifically to teach you about Rule 3. The pieces clicked together in Cassian's mind. She knew I would be assigned to that count. She arranged for you to be assigned to that count. Elena spent her entire career studying the implications of Rule 3, and she concluded that the rule itself was flawed. Not in its intention, but in its secrecy. The cardinal led them to a window overlooking the children's ward. Dozens of young faces stared back, trapped in their in-between state. Elena believed that Rule 3 should be taught to all soul counters, not hidden from them. She argued that understanding the rule would make operatives more effective, not less, but the church hierarchy disagreed. So she arranged a field test. Exactly. The tunnel incident was designed to show you what happens when Rule 3 is followed properly. Souls who aren't ready to choose can be given time and support to make their decision willingly. The result was a perfect count with no lost souls. Cassian looked at the trapped children. "And this was designed to show me what happens when Rule 3 is violated." Yes, Cardinal Benedetti's experiment created a worst-case scenario. Souls forced to submit to counting against their will become trapped in a processing loop. They can't move forward to judgment, and they can't return to life. Lucia raised her hand like a student in class. "But there's a way to fix it, right? That's why you brought Cassian here." Cardinal Toretti smiled sadly. There is a way, but it requires someone to willingly violate Rule 2. Rule 2, never count your own soul. Cassian understood immediately. You want me to use my own life force to power the reset process. Not want, need. The children are trapped in a state that requires massive energy to reverse. The only power source sufficient is a soul counter's own essence. But doing so would mean counting your own soul, which violates the second rule and would result in your immediate death. The chapel fell silent, except for the sound of sparking from the damaged silver counter. There has to be another way. Elena thought so too. She spent years researching alternatives. Cardinal Toretti pulled out a leather journal filled with handwritten notes. She believed that if multiple soul counters worked together, they could share the energy cost and survive the process. How many soul counters? At least 3, but it would require each of them to partially count their own souls, bringing them close to death, but not crossing the final threshold. Cassian activated his communication equipment, hoping the jamming had been lifted. To his relief, the channel crackled to life. This is Volpe requesting immediate emergency backup at Children's Hospital. I need senior operatives Benedetto and Valerius on site immediately with full equipment loads. Volpe, this is dispatch. Both operatives are already en route to your location. Estimated arrival in 4 minutes. Cassian looked at Cardinal Toretti suspiciously. You arranged for them to come. Elena's contingency plan required a full team. Everything you've experienced today has been leading to this moment. 4 minutes later, 2 black motorcycles pulled up outside the chapel. Senior operatives Marco Benedetto and Antonio Valerius entered, both carrying full equipment loads, including backup silver counters. Volpe, Benedetto called. What's the situation? Cassian explained quickly. The trapped children, the failed experiment, and the solution that required 3 soul counters to partially count their own souls simultaneously. Valerius studied the damaged equipment. The energy feedback could kill all of us. Elena's calculations suggested a 70% survival rate if executed properly, Cardinal Toretti offered. And if we don't try? The children remain trapped forever, and the cascade effect eventually spreads to other soul processing operations worldwide. The 3 operatives looked at each other. 7 years of training had prepared them for dangerous assignments, but nothing quite like this. I'm in, Cassian said. But I want to understand something first. Why was Rule 3 never written down? Cardinal Toretti opened Elena's journal to a specific page. Because writing it down makes it official policy, and official policy can be changed by committee vote. Elena discovered that keeping Rule 3 unwritten protected it from political interference, but it also kept it secret from the people who needed to know it. Exactly, which is why Elena spent her final years developing a new approach. The Cardinal showed them the journal's final entries. Elena had proposed a complete restructuring of soul counter training, including full education about Rule 3 and its implications. She died before she could implement the changes, but she left instructions for someone else to complete her work. Lucia stepped forward again. That's where I come in. Mama arranged for me to be on that train so I could teach you about Rule 3 directly. She knew that learning it in the field would make you understand it better than any classroom lesson. Cassian realized the entire day had been an elaborate training exercise designed by a dead woman to prepare him for this exact moment. Let's do this, he said. The 3 soul counters positioned themselves around the altar, each holding a silver counter calibrated for the shared operation. Cardinal Toretti and Lucia stood back as they began the complex process. On my mark, Cassian called, we each count our own souls to exactly 75% completion, then redirect the energy to the trapped children. Hold that level for 60 seconds, then pull back simultaneously. Mark. All 3 silver counters activated simultaneously. Immediately, Cassian felt his life force being drained, but in a controlled manner. The sensation was like having his blood slowly replaced with electricity. Around them, the hospital began to change. The trapped children became more solid, more present. Their expressions shifted from confusion to relief as the processing loop holding them captive began to dissolve. 30 seconds, Benedetto called, his voice strained. The energy cost was higher than Elena's calculations had predicted. Cassian's vision began to blur, and he could hear Valerius breathing heavily. 45 seconds. The children in the visible rooms were beginning to move normally. Whatever had trapped them was breaking apart under the combined force of the 3 soul counters' sacrifice. 60 seconds. Pull back now. All 3 operatives simultaneously disengaged their counters. The backlash knocked them to their knees, but they were alive. Around them, the hospital had returned to normal operations. Real nurses were caring for real patients, and the emergency outside had resolved itself. Status report, Cassian gasped. His standard counter showed normal readings throughout the building. Whatever cascade effect had been threatening the global soul processing system had been neutralized. Cardinal Toretti helped them stand. Elena would be proud. You've proven that her new approach to Rule 3 training can work. What happens now? Now we implement her reforms. Rule 3 becomes part of standard soul counter education, taught openly instead of hidden. The secrecy that made today's crisis possible ends here. Lucia approached Cassian one final time. Mama wanted me to give you this when everything was finished. She handed him a sealed envelope with his name written in elegant handwriting. Inside was a single page. Cassian, if you're reading this, you've successfully completed the most important test any soul counter can face. You've learned that the rules exist to serve souls, not the other way around. Rule 3 will no longer be hidden because you've proven that knowledge makes us stronger, not weaker. Welcome to the new Last Judgment Unit. Elena Marchetti. Beneath the signature was a new assignment. Director of Soul Counter Training and Education. Congratulations, Cardinal Toretti said. Your fieldwork is finished. From now on, your job is to make sure no other soul counter has to learn Rule 3 the way you did. As they left the hospital, Cassian looked back to see Lucia one final time. She waved from the chapel window, and then she was gone, finally able to make her choice and move on to whatever came next. The motorcycle ride back to Vatican City gave him time to think about everything that had changed. Rule 3 would no longer be a secret. Soul counters would be trained to handle reluctant souls properly. And the cosmic system of judgment would be stronger because people understood it better. 3 weeks later, Cassian stood in front of his first class of new soul counter recruits. The training manual on his desk was 3 times thicker than the previous version, with an entire section dedicated to Rule 3 and its implications. Before we begin, he told the class, I want you to understand something important. The rules we follow aren't just bureaucratic requirements. They're guidelines for handling the most important responsibility any human being can have, ensuring that every soul gets the chance to choose their own destiny. He opened the manual to the new section on Rule 3. Count the living separately from the dead, but never count the ones who choose to stay between. This rule exists because some souls need time to understand what choosing means. Our job isn't to force that choice, but to make sure they get the support they need to make it willingly. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. What if they never feel ready to choose? Then we give them more time, because the alternative, forcing souls to submit before they're ready, creates problems that can threaten the entire system. The class took notes as Cassian explained the proper procedures for handling reluctant souls, the correct use of silver counters, and the warning signs of cascade failures in soul processing operations. But most importantly, he taught them that rules weren't meant to be followed blindly. They were tools for achieving the ultimate goal, making sure every soul had the opportunity for proper judgment, whether that led to redemption, damnation, or something in between. At the end of the day, as students filed out of the classroom, Cassian found a note on his desk from Cardinal Toretti. "Elena would be proud of what you've built here. The Last Judgment unit is stronger than it's ever been." Outside his window, Rome continued its ancient rhythms. People lived and died, made choices and faced consequences. And somewhere in the underground chambers of Vatican City, a new generation of soul counters prepared to help them navigate the most important transition any soul could make. Rule 3 was no longer a secret, and the world was better for it.